been coming to these meetings for a few years. My show and tell is that about 5.5 years ago, our family shared a ghost experience with the family next door. Their child had died. And in the wake of that, there was some phenomenon that at first we tried to brush off as a series of coincidences, but it eventually came to realize that there was a sequence of events taking place. I made a point of writing down the sequence of events because as random things, they might not mean anything, but ultimately there was a body of phenomenon that was really unusual. I know when I come to these meetings, I see people that half the group will say, well, I talk to ghosts or aliens like neighbors over the back fence, and then the other half of the group are people that have never had these kind of experiences. And even though I've had ambiguous experiences in the past, this particular thing was new to us. Suddenly I went from being critical and a disbeliever, and being thrust into a situation where I had to realize that there was really something very big going on, and that we were privileged to see this. Unfortunately, it was happening in the wake of my neighbor's child dying, so I didn't call in the Ghostbusters or anything right away because it was a very sensitive thing. But ultimately, we felt that we were very privileged to be able to watch this take place, and unfold before us, and some people were more affected than others by it. I mean, I found it life-changing myself. So initially, I've had some ambiguous experiences of my own, where I wonder, is it coincidence or not? Probably the most dramatic of them was one night in the 70s. Feeling that I had to go to a church on a Wednesday night, which of course churches aren't normally open on a Wednesday night, and the movies are always open, and had no idea why this was. So literally got out of the house, hopped in the car, and drove to the nearest Catholic church and started pulling on doors to try to get in. I hadn't been in a church for years, except for weddings and funerals, that kind of thing. So pulling on doors, it wasn't open, and I felt so strongly about it, hopped in the car again, drove to another one, miles away, pulling on doors again on a Wednesday night. They're always open in movies, but they're not open in real life, and closed again, and literally drove another 5-10 miles, and pulling on doors to get into this church. Completely inexplicable. And then got home, next day, had a call from a very good friend's sister that he died at that time, that previous night. So it was out of the ordinary, but it wasn't proof that anything had actually happened. When I came to Australia, there was one day where I was up on Mount Cootha with my son, and I thought I'd had a heart attack or something. I'd never had one before, so I thought it was very unusual. And when I got home, got a call from the States that a friend had died at that exact time. He'd been trying to save a child in the water back in the States, the other side of the world, and he had died of a heart attack in the water at that same moment. So coincidence, but it didn't push me over the edge. What happened in this event? This was about 5.5 years ago, up on the north side. We moved into a new housing estate and hadn't actually bonded with the neighbors that closely. They were different kind of people. But our children had already bonded with, my son had one of their sons the same age, and then my daughter had this friend her age, which is 16 years old. So I'd only said hi to him in the distance. His name was Cameron. So one night, on a Thursday night, an ambulance was next door, and we came to find out that Cameron had suffered a brain aneurysm. He pleaded for help. Ambulance came to get him, but he appears to have died of the aneurysm on site that night. They kept him on life support. They kept the body going for a couple of days, and they pulled the pin on him 2 days later. So it was a very tragic event. In the wake of his dying, funeral funeral arrangements were being made, and he made a mention that he wanted to become, join some Christian organization, and he bought a very specific crucifix for this, but they couldn't find it. They wanted it for the funeral. So they sent, my wife offered to look for a crucifix for him to be buried with, because this was just some final wish type of thing. And the one she came back with was the same crucifix, only slightly smaller, which again is only coincidence. We weren't thinking of anything eerie happening at that time, but it was, it replaced the missing crucifix and was the same animal. On the day of the funeral, as next door, we were hosting a wake as well for the kids. We had the kids in our place, and when the mother came over, you want to give them some kind of comfort, and out of habit, I just kind of said, well, this is a mother, maybe you can look for the signs. In the past, we've had friends say that when Auntie Jezebel died or something, they saw her favorite bird or that kind of thing. So when I mentioned this I mentioned, kind of watch for the signs. It was kind of just a fluffy thing to be telling her. It was heartfelt, but kind of fluffy. She said, I've already had dialogues with him. I've already had a dream. I'm talking to him in the dreams, and I thought, well, that's eerie, but that's all right. She said in the dream he was comforting her and telling her, the deceased was telling her that he was all right, but he was also quite upset that he'd been cut short in his life. He wasn't happy about the situation, and in fact even questioned why they hadn't tried to save him or get him saved. He was that upset about leaving all his friends behind, and people have assured me that if you planned your life out in advance, that wouldn't be the case. But that's what the dream was. So we just thought of they're being eaten with guilt or something. They couldn't save him. So again, we're not thinking in terms of a ghost just yet. At the funeral, one thing that became a theme for the next year was quite often the funerals would have the dragonfly theme. Have you ever been to a funeral where they do that? The dragonfly is supposed to represent, it's a metaphor that the larvae in the pond don't recognize the soul when it goes on and becomes the dragonfly hovering overhead. So ultimately it ended up on his gravestone. They all had necklaces with the dragonfly, and it became a theme later on, which I'll mention, but it is worth remembering. On the day of the funeral, he wanted to be an Air Force cadet, and at Albany Creek Cemetery, it was coincidental, but people got a big kick out of it. Some Air Force jets decided to fly in formation over the funeral, which was quite a coincidence. But again, it wasn't anything that was planned or prearranged. Coming back to our houses from the funeral, two different people entered at different times into the houses at the wakes and mentioned that one said they'd stopped the car because there was like a bright orb, a bright light, as if somebody had shined a mirror in their face. One person stopped the car. Another person coming in from a different direction also walked in a few minutes later and said they'd been stopped. But these are in two different streets, and both these people said, they'd seen this. And so we thought, well, that's interesting, but it would not have been, as near as we could tell, it would not have been the same kids shining a mirror in somebody's face. So somebody saying, okay, we've seen this stuff in broad daylight. It was enough, however, to make me remark, while sitting at the wake, I turned to somebody and said, I've talked, if you're the kind of soul that believes in communications from the dead, I've talked to her about the signs, and as I said the word signs, across the 3 o'clock sky was a large visible shooting star. So, which again, coincidence, but it really knocked us for a loop. It was a very surreal day because people were seeing orbs. I'd seen, something fill the afternoon sky in broad daylight. So the next few days is when patterns began to emerge. No matter how many times they closed turned off his bedroom lights, upstairs, they turn on again by themselves. I mean, it was happening over and over and over again. They just couldn't seem to keep the lights out in his room. My wife went next door one time and initially saw their cats. They had a couple cats that were just, puffing up and jumping around and being quite frightened the first couple of days, as if something was frightening them, and which was fine enough. But she said she became a bit more unnerved when she went in one day and they were, how cats will rub up against things affectionately, rubbing against a chair leg and that. She said these cats appear to be rubbing against something in midair, which was unusual. Now those are observations that are kind of fluffy, but all three of their mobile phones started malfunctioning. And she would, occasionally the mother would hold up the mobile phone and go, "Look, I just got a message from him." It wasn't, I wasn't going to push it because she was grieving so hard, but she, all three of their phones started malfunctioning, and they were getting, he used to send them love messages and pictures of himself and that kind of thing, saying, "Love you, Mom," and these old messages, she claims, were coming up spontaneously out of memory banks, and it was happening not in one phone, but a couple of the phones. So around this time, seeing they were grieving so hard, for some reason I kept getting this pervasive thought that the mother might benefit from meeting a medium that I'd only heard about. We'd had a neighbor that had died the year previously in a different estate, and she appeared to be very cluey, to the point where she grabbed the deceased wife literally off the street into her shop and said, "I've got a message for you," and described where a missing wallet was and all kinds of stuff. So she appeared to be quite cluey. So I entertained thoughts of putting the mother in touch with this medium, but I could not bring myself to do it because I thought, it could go so wrong, it could be so tacky, it could be just not be in good taste. But nonetheless, I could not shake that thought. Finally, one night, I had a dream, and this is only a dream, but it really spooked me, because suddenly I was face to face with, it was just a baby's face with his eyes. They were looking at me, but no nose and no mouth. So what I was looking at was kind of like a Humpty Dumpty type of thing. There was no mouth, and metaphorically, what I thought the dream was trying to tell me was that he was alive yet dead, because clearly the eyes were looking around. He was peering right into me and imploring me telepathically in the dream that maybe I should put this mother, this mother needed this emotional help, and maybe I should put him in touch with this medium. So when I woke up, I was quite shook by this. I said, obviously we're getting way too close to the source of this. I'm being, the empathy must be causing me to have this, strange kind of nightmare. But it was one of the most vivid dreams I've ever had in my life. He was neither dead nor alive, but he's asking for help. So I told my friends about it, and this was a very auspicious day, because I went to work and said, "Man, I had this really weird dream. I'm going to have to, shake this, shake this somehow. We're obviously too close to their grief, and it's causing us to do weird things." And took a break, walked out to my car, and I said almost out loud, and I might have muttered it out loud. I said, "There must be an explanation for this phenomenon." And as I flipped on the radio, the thing that came out, spontaneously was the existence of angels. It was mid-song somewhere, and I thought, well, that's spooky, but it's still a coincidence. So I decided, well, that's interesting. When I got home that night, I told him, well, I've had this dream, I've had this, funny thing on the radio, but I think we're taking this too serious, or I'm taking this too serious. I have to settle down a little bit. And I walked back to my room. I'd been trying to read difficult books at the time. It was a little perverse pleasure. And the book I was reading at the time was the Jewish Holy Scriptures, which is the Old Testament. So I plunked myself down on the bed and said, okay, well, let's just forget about all that stuff for the day, and opened up to the page, and then the page I opened up to is a description of a young boy coming in out of the fields, walks into the room, tells his mother and father, my head hurts, and he lays down on the bed and dies in front of him. So he said, okay, that's three in a row. It's I hardly know what to think now. And I'm still contemplating, do I tell the mother about this medium or not? The mother came over with the surviving brother, and they were in the back of the house talking to my wife. And what they said is the phones are still doing stuff, and I hear Isabel, the mother, tell my wife, look, we tell Cameron good night sometimes on the phone, and he talks back to us sometimes. And here I hear this in the back of the house, and they say something like good night, Cameron, or something, and suddenly the phone talks back to him and says something. They mention the GPSs were doing funny. So I was in the front of the house thinking, okay, well, this is unusual. Oh my God, the phone's just answered them back there. And I'm sitting in front of the house, and I hear, and I'm contemplating, do I tell them about the medium or not? And then I hear the GPS start moving up the hallway. They're going, okay, left, right, straight, coming up. And they come right up behind me, and it says stop, turn left. And I turned around, and I'm looking right at her, and they said, okay, well, I think it's about time I throw in the towel. I cave in, I need to tell you about this medium. This is a very unusual day here. So again, it could all be coincidence, but the sequence of events was just unbelievable. Ultimately, we sent her to the medium. As a gift, we sent her to this same medium. And fortunately, it was not only comforting information to her, stuff that only they would understand, but I think the most interesting thing that came out of it was he supposedly told her that he would be back in 16 years. So he actually gave a date, and all we could figure was, well, he might come back as his brother's child or something. But it was an interesting reading, because she said, yes, the stuff that the medium offered her was not only passive information, but also, something to look forward to. So the people that were witnessing that kind of stuff, there's actually several. There was our core group of adults, the two families, but there were also others. Cameron's best friend was Alan, and his father Peter I was running across repeatedly at the shops. Now, Peter was a divorced father, and Cameron and Alan used to sit in the bedroom together, and Peter would make food for them. So they had this secret knock, special knock they do on the wall, to get Peter to bring food to him. And so Peter started hearing this repeatedly. He said, there's no one in the house, and I'm hearing this very specific knock. He says, I don't think I'm losing my mind. This very specific knock is happening over and over again. I'm completely convinced that Cameron's visiting our house as well. So around the house, my neighbors were still experiencing the lights going off, and there were other things going on in their house. I had never heard the full extent of what the deceased family was seeing, but the father would occasionally describe to me that he, out of the corner of his eye, he might see him. Or Corey, the brother, saw him one day, like pretty much head on, semi-transparent. He was initially scared, but then eventually he was comforted by it. He thought it was pretty cool. The father also had the GPS repeatedly doing things. He claims that the phone sat unused all night on the table. He came down, had breakfast, and as soon as he finished breakfast, the GPS on the phone started up and started giving him instructions, and he literally went left, right, around the table or whatever it was, around the sofa, out the front door, turned left, turned right, and stopped. And when he stopped, and this is about 3 or 4 weeks after the funeral, he looked down and there was the crucifix that had been missing all this time, and it was completely unscathed. I mean, it would have been driven over, dozens of times, but the lost crucifix, which should have been in the house somewhere, was sitting in the driveway. Greg, the father, also said that he was looking for something one day, and in his haste suddenly heard Cameron say, "It's on the chair, Dad," and he looked and there it was. So whether it was something subconscious or not, that's the kind of interactions he was experiencing. My wife claims to have seen Cameron on at least 2 or 3 occasions. She said he was semi-transparent when she saw him, and just kind of smiled standing in our hallway and disappeared. Another time was in the car. So it's interesting because she really poo-poos the whole idea of ghosts and all kinds of stuff, but here she was quite happy to say, yes, I've seen him a couple times now. My son, who was playing with their their surviving son, said he had a couple experiences over there. For the most part, we weren't telling our kids about this. We didn't want to freak out the kids. I know my daughter was pretty upset about it because it had been her friend. But they said there was one day, and I've just asked my son about this again a week ago. He claims that there was one day where they approached the electric garage door without hitting the buzzer, and it's not sensor activated. They said they walked up to the door and then it opened for them, and they kind of looked at each other for a moment and then passed through it and kind of joked that it might be Cameron, and it closed behind them. Then they came up to it again, and it went up again, and this is without touching the buzzer. And so they went back out and they said, this is really interesting, just as the mother drove up. So the mother drove up, hopped out of the car, and they said they must have been just in the zone or really feeling it that day. They said, Mom, don't touch your buzzer. And she stepped out of the car, and then the door opened up again, and she was able to walk through. And he claims that the door went up and down 5 times in about an hour, which is, again, it's interesting. I thought maybe it was a kid making up a story, but they claim that this really happened. He also claims that he was in the house one day, looked up the top of the stairway, and in front of the door he saw a shadow person, which he presumed immediately was Cameron standing up at the top of the stairs. So all this pretty much happened in that first month. The funeral, this is an interesting thing. The funeral, for some reason, there was a shortfall on the money for the funeral. There was $1,000 that needed to be found, and the parents were worrying about it a little bit. And, I mean, ultimately insurances paid for that and that kind of thing, but there was a worry about this $1,000. My wife was fond of going to the pokies, and she'd never won the hyperlink. She just dying to win this hyperlink, and one night found herself sitting in front of the pokies and decided to call on Cameron and said, Cameron, I don't care about keeping this money, but if I can win this hyperlink, I just dying to win the hyperlink. I promise I'll give you the money at the funeral. She pressed the button and got $1,013, which was that was the 1,000 that they were looking for, and 13 just as something. I mean, she came back and was just stoked about it. She thought it was hilarious, But they'd given her this check, is how they do it. They don't hand you the $1,000; they give you this check. So I kept saying, well, you've just won this $1,000 with Cameron's name on your lips. You're going to have to hand over this. There's no turning back now. You're going to have to handle it. We agreed. Oh yeah, and she get it. So a day or so later, when she came home, she walked in the door, and as I'm standing in the kitchen, and she walked in and says, "I've been to the optometrist today. I've got 20/20 vision." This is what she rattles off. Starts to walk out the door into the patio, looking at me back through the window, and I say, "Have you given Cameron that check? Have you given the family this $1,000 check yet?" She says, "Not yet." And as she says it, she's looking straight over my shoulder and calls out to one of my children. She thinks one of my children just walked by, and there was no child there. And I actually walked in and looked up and down, and there was no child there. None of our children just walked by. And And then she realized, she stopped a second and said, my God, the person I just saw walk by in the school uniform had the hat on backwards, which is what Cameron used to do. Suddenly, because our kids don't even wear the hat, and suddenly she realized that she just claimed she had 20/20 vision, and then, claimed she'd seen somebody vividly enough that she'd called out to them thinking that, there was a person there. So, yeah, they got their check. There were other people that heard him as well. Up the street, there was one night when the father was up the street with this guy named Drew, who was at the time really hitting the alcohol hard, and they were having this party on the front lawn or something like that, and they were really tying one on, and with two other people. And he said suddenly both of them, the father and Drew, at the same time heard Cameron's voice yell out, "Take it easy, Drew," because they were just getting too hammered. And both of them instantly looked at each other, and they both heard the exact same thing. The two other people didn't hear it at all, but these two guys just suddenly went like that. And he said they sobered up real quick because it scared the hell out of them. Then there was my daughter. She was the one that we were trying not to upset because she talk about Cameron and ghosts, and she'd get all teary. It was spooking her. So we didn't talk much about what was happening. But one night she was in her room next to the window with her friend laying on the bed, and they started to talk about Cameron. And suddenly this bright light was in the back window, and she described it like a spotlight. Now the only thing that would have been out there is about 2 meters to the fence, and then there was the roof of the house behind us. So there was nobody on the roof shining a torch in. I made sure that my wife hadn't been joking with them and shining the torch on them. But as they mentioned Cameron, suddenly there was this bright light, and my daughter freaked so bad she started crying. And her friend, the first thing your friend says is, well, then you don't need to know what I'm doing right now. And what her friend said was as my daughter was seeing the light, that she felt the bed depressed next to her and felt that somebody was sitting next to her. So that, at the same time, they both were wrapped up in this event, whatever it was. Now the dragonfly thing, I told you, there was this dragonfly thing going on. And I thought it was the silliest, despite everything that had happened. For the longest, at the beginning, I tried to ignore that all this was happening, and then I was intrigued, and then eventually I threw in the towel and I said, we'll help this along. We're privileged to see this. We might never see this again. Let's see where this goes. It's asked us for help. We've done stuff. Not a lot of humor, but there's not a lot of dialogue going on, but these events are happening. The neighbors kept claiming that every time they bring up Cameron, the dragonfly would show up, and some think, well, how common is that? It's like saying a blowfly showed up or something. But they keep talking about the dragonfly. But they say they'll bring up his name, and suddenly out of nowhere, the dragonfly will come and perch right next to him. And I thought it was really silly. And after a few months, there was one afternoon actually, where a dragonfly came up to me. And just perched about a meter or so from my face, and I was eye to eye with it. I'm thinking, that's Cameron's dragonfly, and I'm just kind of observing it as a bug. And then they said, well, it wasn't leaving. So I averted my eyes in about 45 degrees, and the thing went out and perched at 45 degrees. So I said, okay, that's interesting. So I said, okay, 90 degrees over here, and it went 90 degrees. It got to the point where I was not following the dragonfly was following where my eyes were. And it went on for a good 10 minutes. It was comical to the point where I'd do that, and then it would go over there. And I said, it's like I don't know if I'm hypnotized as a bug or whatever, but this thing's responding. This is like it's remote control. I've never seen anything like that in my life. So after about 10 minutes, I said, okay, that's enough. That's interesting. Their relationship with the dragonfly, they were talking about it all the time. The dragonfly shows up when we're here. They went to Vanuatu, and they were in a sealed church. They walked into a church, closed the door behind them, and the dragonfly was suddenly in front of them. And they said, and they're always, they're happily accepting that Cameron was always talking to them, is what their point of view was. The weirdest one is The father works as an engineer at Brisbane Airport Corporation. He's one of their engineers that helps when the baggage carousels break down or something. And he's the guy, the pneumatic engineer that they bring in. He says one day one of the whole carousels broke down, and he went out to go find out what it was. And looking, you know, in a big haste, you know, because everything's held up. And he finally found what was holding up the whole baggage was a button with a dragonfly on it. So he reckoned that, you know, of all things, it was Cameron talking to him once again. So ultimately, in the course, this lasted for months, but it seemed to be decreasing. And approaching the 1-year anniversary of his death, they were going to have this little graveside sit and have a few drinks, that kind of thing. And with a week to go, suddenly I got this, you know, this bug that I'd go see this psychic that I'd sent so many people to over the years, rather flippantly, but I'd never seen myself. And when I did finally meet this person, first thing she did was start talking, you know, I was hoping, you know, I've never had a reading for myself, you know, my own relatives, that kind of thing. But sure enough, the first thing that happens is she starts talking about this young man, you know, there's a young man here, and started rattling off, you know, just all kinds of strange imagery about watermelons or fingers at the top of the stairs doing this, or, you know, French doors. I mean, just all kinds of stuff that didn't mean anything to me. Said he introduced himself with sports equipment, basketballs and stuff, which he had been a sports star. You know, they even got a bench by the basketball court in his name because he was such a sports star. So it went on. This reading went on for the better part of an hour, and it got to the point where she said, you know, do you want to hear anything about yourself? You know, because, you know, all you're hearing about is this other person you're unable to verify. And I said, no, he's on a roll. You know, keep it going. And eventually, she told me a few things about my own kids, which was frighteningly accurate. And then as a send-off, said, I'll give you an image that hasn't happened yet. And sure enough, 45 minutes later, this image occurred. And so I went and told her, again, I approached the parents and said, you know, despite all we've been through, I've just been to the psychic. She's given me all this imagery that doesn't mean anything to me. And of course, the parents were going, well, yes, we know exactly what the watermelon is. We know exactly what the finger is. We know exactly what this is. So at the end of the day, you know, as far as our involvement was, it almost like magic. The first year anniversary had stopped, and that was the end of it for us, pretty much. So maybe I don't have enough faith. I don't know if it was him talking to us, you know, as an intelligent interaction, or if we were interacting with just the husk of what was left of a person, or even stranger yet, that somehow all the interested parties had created something. As a group mind, we created something that we were interacting with, and appeared to be interacting with us and affecting electronics and that kind of stuff. There were people, I know there were some neighbors down the street that were very close to them that didn't have any of these experiences, and they said up front that they didn't believe in them, and therefore got nothing. So to this day, I don't know if it's, you know, expectation or what it was, but it was, you know, it certainly kept me coming to meeting, you know, instantly looking on the net and seeing if I could find anything about, you know, what we just experienced. It was very interesting. And that's it. That's my show and tell.